Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tax Talk, broadcast by the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. My name is Jordan Bateman, and I'm the British Columbia Director of the CTF. And joining me, as always, is the CTF's Alberta Director, Paige MacPherson. Hi, Paige.
Hi, Jordan. Fun to looking forward to our guest today.
Yes, it's going to be good. Our guest today is Jodie Emery, who is a longtime activist, small business owner here in the lower mainland of British Columbia. And for many, many years, she and a small band of dedicated folks have been pushing for the legalization of marijuana and cannabis. And we are on the cusp of that here in Canada, thanks to the new Prime Minister. So those of us at the CTF are now wrapping our head around, what this public policy change looks like. What does it mean for taxes? How do we tax it in a way that is fair, but doesn't keep the black market? So we'll be picking Jodie's brain for for a good few minutes to have her tell us what to do. It'll be good.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really looking forward to speaking about, how do we actually have this policy in place and not have a massive bureaucracy? That, I think, is a question weighing on a lot of people's minds. Yeah,
exactly. And Jodie, feel free to chime in. Jodie's in Santiago, Chile, which makes this a transcontinental broadcast page.
Yep, the message goes worldwide.
There you go. So just lots of ways to connect with us. If you've joined us here live on Blab, you can make sure to subscribe to our feed to track all of our shows. You can comment in the sidebar to the right of your screen. And if you type in /Q into that sidebar, you can actually pop up a question for us, and we're happy to answer those. You can also tweet us at Jordan Bateman or at Paige McP or at Jodie Emery. And we're looking forward to hearing from you. Just so you're aware, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to just three things: lower taxes, less waste, and more government accountability. So that's what drives all of the communications, research, and advocacy work we do. You can visit our website at taxpayer.com to see all the stuff that Paige, myself, and the whole CTF team are working on. So, we usually start with a what's new. So, Paige, what's new in Alberta?
Big news here in Alberta. I think we all knew it was coming in some form or another, but we finally have the big carbon tax plan. It's going to be expensive. They're saying that gas is going to go up 7 cents a liter by 2018. It's going to be costing families anywhere from an additional $300 to $600 a year. And that's going up. It's going to continue to go up every year until 2030. It'll continue then, but when it's 2030, it'll probably cost around $900 for the average family. And I mean, that's not including the cost of clothing that's going to go up, the cost of food, anything that's transported across our province. Because, we always have to remember that the carbon tax is a tax on everything that moves, essentially. And of course, everything that has plastics and petroleum products in it. So it's going to be a doozy of a tax. They're also phasing out coal-fired power plants here, shutting them down. Same thing they did in Ontario. In Ontario, energy prices or electricity prices skyrocketed. I mean, they're 77% higher for peak time electricity use. So I hope that doesn't happen here in Alberta, but I think that this is likely when you consider this kind of a policy. So it's going to be interesting. We don't know where the revenue is going to go yet. It's not revenue neutral or even billed it was billed as such. But I mean, I think that the one in BC where you guys are has a little more credibility. It's probably not 100% revenue neutral for taxpayers, but a little more credibility when it comes to calling it that. Here they're saying because they're taking money from taxpayers and spending it in Alberta that it's revenue neutral, which is not at all what revenue neutral means. But so we've got a lot of interesting conversations about that going on here in Alberta now.
Yeah, under that definition, every tax ever is revenue neutral.
Exactly.
I mean, the carbon tax in BC, when they first brought it in, the premier at the time, Gordon Campbell, brought in an income tax cut across the board. Right. And that was about 1/3 of the revenue the carbon tax ended up flowing back to people through that income tax cut. He also cut taxes on business. In the past few years, it's evolved more into the annoying boutique tax credit kind of thing where, a science and research tax credit that only a few people can access, or a film tax credits have been topped up through this. Not really broad-based enough. So that's where revenue neutrality falls down a little bit. And we've moved from about 1/3 of the money being returned to taxpayers through that income tax cut to about 17%. So that's one of the problems here. But in Alberta, I mean, this is, in BC, the main opposition still to the tax is our rural folks, people who don't have the option to take transit to work or to buy a smaller car, a Prius instead of a pickup truck, people who have to heat their homes, maybe don't live in multifamily situations where, there's some savings as far as heating goes. So I imagine the rural people are not happy with this tax.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, there's a number of reasons there. You don't have the transit options. You can't live in an apartment, where you might share walls on either side. The heating costs are maybe a little bit lower. There's no options like that. It also is, when you're talking about transporting goods, it's just simply further. And when you talk to rural folks, they'll tell you when they go to town, It's not a 5-minute drive to the grocery store. It's a bit more of an expedition. So when they're driving, they're actually driving more. Of course, for work, a lot of farmers and ranchers here in Alberta use tractors. That's a lot of diesel that they're consuming. It's going to be expensive on them that way. Fertilizer uses natural gas. That's going to be more expensive. There's a lot of reasons with the carbon tax side, but on the coal phase-out side as well, you've got most of those jobs are in rural communities when it comes to the people who are working in these coal-fired power plants. So when you're phasing those out, we have the government saying here there's going to be sort of transition payments, but no transition payment that's temporary is as good as a job. So that's going to hit hard for sure on rural communities, and that's really unfortunate. But luckily, back to that revenue neutral thing, we have lots of economists that have come out and really called the Premier's bluff on this and have said, in BC, like I agree with you, if it might be revenue neutral for government, but it's not revenue neutral for taxpayers because most families are benefiting from that film tax credit as an example. But in BC, at least you could sort of call it revenue neutral. Here, it just isn't at all. So I think that's important. And the other thing, a lot of people are bringing up BC, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, actually. So they're bringing up BC as an example of where the economy didn't really crash because of the carbon tax. But I don't think that you can look at the carbon tax in isolation. The carbon tax was brought in at the same time as an income tax cut and a business tax cut was brought in. So the economic benefits, you can't write those off. They were obviously part of that happening if there were any economic benefits at all.
Yeah, exactly. The reasons for BC's success is in the eye of the beholder. I would say it's because the government, tried to balance or has kept the budget balanced for several years now, fiscal restraint when it comes to public sector wages. And then, you're right, the tax cuts came along. So, why don't those tax cuts get the credit for it? Why is it the carbon tax that gets the credit for it? Jodie, you've actually written quite a bit on affordability in British Columbia. What do you think?
Well, I really dislike this anti-car culture. Just everything you're saying, Paige, about driving. It really upsets me seeing Vancouver trying to stop people from driving and saying that's somehow protecting the environment. Vehicles are one of the most important inventions in humankind's history. And if you want to stop people, money, and ideas from moving, take away people's cars. The ability to use your vehicle to drive to work, to businesses, that's really important. And so all of this push towards getting people out of cars and onto buses. And I'm thinking, how can a mother with 4 kids who have to go to soccer and she needs to go to Walmart and pick up a truckload of food and paper towel and all the things humans use, how can she do that with a bike and a bus? It's not possible. So it's interesting how all of these taxes are trying to punish people for doing what's absolutely necessary to create the tax revenue that pays for everything. So that's not so much about affordability, but I do have to comment about the affordability and just taxes in general. Everyone tuning in here probably knows a lot more than I do about taxation, but in a general sense, when I talk to people and remind them how much of their money is taken into taxation, and they'll say, well, we get services in return. And I say, well, how do you feel about the quality of those services? And they'll all say, well, it's not very good. And so clearly there's a lot of misuse of our tax dollars and a lot of money that could be generated in other areas and industries that are up and coming. So.
Jodie Emery for Mayor of Vancouver, Paige. You heard it here first. Let's do it.
Yeah, the NPA needs somebody. Like Gregor Robertson and Vision don't have any opposition, and that's upsetting to me on all levels of government when you start to see that there's no opposition really at all. And even when we had the federal government for a while, there was just Harper and no one else really in place. Leighton had died. The Liberals were looking for a leader. So it's very discouraging and very worrisome whenever you have any sort of level of government that doesn't have an active opposition party. So we'll see what happens with the Vision. I don't want to upset them too much because, I don't want to give them trouble. They already got upset at me for bike lane commentary. So we'll just wait till the next election comes around and see what I might do.
Yeah, like all good Vancouver people, we welcome our new Vision overlords and just leave us alone. No, but you're right about that. I've never seen a government make it so difficult to move anywhere as Vision Vancouver has. I mean, they purposely try to keep us out of Vancouver. And I mean, I live in the suburbs and, I'd love to take my kids downtown from time to time, but it is such a pain to get in. And it's, designed that way by the government.
Exactly. And they say they want to say it's to reduce pollution, yet keeping cars in traffic. It just doesn't make any sense at all.
No, it is. And it's expensive. I was going to say, I used to live in Vancouver and it's a beautiful city. I mean, probably the most beautiful city I've lived in. And it's a great city in many ways, but affordability, I mean, I ultimately left because, we decided there's no way that we can afford to live here and raise a family here unless you're going to live outside of the city. So, it's expensive and making life, additionally difficult by trying to, phase out cars or whatever else you're doing. I think that people, sometimes government planners kind of forget what it's like in their individual lives for individual people who just need to take their kids to daycare, get themselves to work, buy stuff from Walmart, exactly like you said, just normal people things. Government planners can sometimes forget that.
Yeah, exactly. In government, I think everyone thinks that everyone else lives the way they do. And we saw it with the TransLink referendum, for instance. Jodie and I worked on that, where people, live in a condo in the West End, and they think everyone else lives like that or should live like that, and that just isn't the reality of a huge region like BC. All right, I have my news stories from Ontario, and not to pick on Ontario, but man, they are a mess. So Ontario is just come out with their budget, their 8th straight deficit budget. And in those 8 years, they've added $140 billion in debt. And their debt's now over $300 billion, which actually makes them the most indebted sub-national government on the planet. So more than any state, more than California, they have the highest debt to GDP ratio of any sub-national government in the world. And the thought occurred to me, and this is actually a piece by Brian Lee Crowley from our friends at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. He has a piece in today's Globe and Mail business section where he kind of tongue-in-cheek points out, if running deficits and running up big infrastructure spending and running up debt really does spur the economic growth that these folks say they did, Ontario's economy should be booming. I mean, they've literally blown $140 billion over 8 years, and yet the economy there is worse than ever before. So he kind of puts the boots to that whole idea that running these massive deficits and running up debt is going to do anything to help your economy.
It's crazy. And, we were talking last week with our Ontario director, Christine, and I think we talked a little bit about debt interest payments, which is always the craziest part to me, about Ontario is I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they spend so much money on paying down, interest payments on the debt, which is effectively the same as, you run up your visa and you're just consistently paying off, interest payments on your debt. It becomes more and more expensive to borrow for the average person with a Visa card, but also for the government using the taxpayer Visa card. But it also means that you're not going to have the kind of money that you need for the social programs that you want. And I mean, the Liberal government, I used to be a reporter actually, and I covered that election when Kathleen Wynne was elected premier. And that was all they ever talked about was, the need for these services. We can't cut, can't slash and burn. You have to have these services. But what you're basically securing for future generations by racking up the debt interest payments is that they're going to have to pay that chunk of money to debt interest instead of to education, instead of to healthcare. You're completely compromising future social programs. And I don't know if they don't understand that or what. I mean, Ontario has received countless warnings from credit rating agencies, and then they've been downgraded. It's a big problem in that province. There are consequences to just never paying your bills.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's yeah, the news out of Ontario is frightening for the entire country. I mean, Ontario has been the economic engine of Canada for so long, although, you could argue the West during high days of oil was starting to take that over. But I was talking to a senior cabinet minister in BC yesterday, and he was expressing concern over Ontario's debt and what it means for the national economy and what it means for BC, because it's a drag on all of us. So, Christine, our Ontario director, is doing the Lord's work there in Ontario, trying to get these guys to look at it. The other big fear is Ontario keeps re-electing these people, running up these massive deficits and debt. And the fear is, if you don't hold them electorally accountable, what impetus is there for change?
Yeah, there's very little consequence to those bad decisions. That is definitely a problem in Ontario.
It's a problem with government in general. I mean, whenever things go wrong, it's just the entity at large that can be blamed, and no individual has any responsibility.
It's true. That was a big problem. Obviously, here in Alberta, we had the same government for over 40 years, and there wasn't really an opposition for a lot of that time. At least an opposition that was, pushing hard enough as they needed to. So now, obviously, this was kind of a change election that we've had. The spending has stayed the same. They've continued. The NDP has continued the legacy of PC spending. We haven't seen any change really on that front. But of course, the taxes are higher now. But some people in the province will still say, well, it was a government that was in for so long. Without being challenged, and that was problematic in and of itself. And I agree. I mean, that can be a big problem. People get dirt under their fingernails after some time at it, right? My friend used that expression with me the other day. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get to the main event here. Jodie Emery, she's a longtime, she's a small business owner, longtime activist for marijuana legalization in British Columbia. She and her husband, Mark, have been working on this for years. They're in Santiago, Chile right now at the Expo Weed 2015 conference. And we're at a pivotal point in Canadian history. The Prime Minister has announced that, has promised that he's going to legalize, regulate, and tax cannabis. This is big news, and we're going down a public policy path that we in Canada haven't gone down in decades, taking a prohibited substance and making it legal. So Jodie's been thinking about this for years, and we're excited. First of all, congratulations, Jodie, to you and Mark on finally getting this so close. I mean, so close you can probably taste it.
Thank you. Even though Trudeau didn't really want to stand beside us and say anything.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't need a friend. I need someone to do some changes.
Yes, the irony is not lost on all of us, that's for sure. But why don't you start? First of all, tell us what you're doing in Santiago, because that's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, Mark, once he got out of prison last August in 2014, he started receiving invitations from activists around the world to go and speak at different conferences. So we've been to Vienna, we've been to Prague, we've been to Amsterdam and to Barcelona and Irun. So we've been to a few places, and quite a whirlwind tour, and throughout Ireland as well with the United Nations Drug Advisor, Dr. Jao Gulao. So people have invited Mark to come speak because clearly marijuana legalization or policy reform is something that's happening all over the world. It's something everyone's paying attention to. And it's because the United States has done a lot on that front in the last few years on a state level. But it's also that before the United States started having these legalization referendums and initiatives, you had different countries around the world trying to bend the rules or at least make a little bit of progress. So, of course, Amsterdam is recognized for a tolerant approach, but it's not legal there. And Portugal decriminalized all drugs in 2001, I believe it was, or it's been over a decade of a lot of experience that they've had with all drugs being decriminalized. So now we've got Uruguay as well as a legal system. We were hoping to visit there, but not this trip. But their system is not really in place yet, and it's very, very government-centric. It's totally from within the government, and it's not working out very well so far. But when we were traveling to these places, it's because the activists there have known of Mark for the decades. He did a lot of work. He was the only activist who was willing to bring seeds from Amsterdam and distribute them to people all over the world, and the only person giving money to global marijuana marches and to a lot of people. So it's very exciting to meet these activists who are growing a lot of plants and selling a lot of seeds. And they say, Mark Emery, I remember your old cannabis culture, the magazine. They really know about all the work he did, and they've taken so many leaps and bounds forward. So our tours have been fascinating because I had no idea how much marijuana activism and advocacy and business industry was taking place around the world. It was almost kind of hush-hush, I think, so that the American government didn't give them any trouble. But now we have a very exciting point in history, because with Trudeau getting elected, and everybody down here says, oh, Trudeau, Canada, handsome Prime Minister. And oh, I guess that's what he's known for. But they also say, legalization, it's happening. You guys are going to legalize it. And that's something that's very bold and different than the states doing it on their own at Washington, Colorado. The federal government there has been doing a few different little pieces of legislation and change, releasing prisoners, telling the DEA to leave states alone. So Obama has allowed a lot of good things to happen, but at a federal level, with a westernized country or first world or whatever you want to call it, Canada is really in a very important position right now. The whole world really is looking at him about how are you going to legalize it, especially with the United Nations Single Convention or Narcotics Agreement. No one is supposed to legalize marijuana. It's not allowed to happen, but something is going to have to change. Trudeau promised he would legalize it. He issued his mandate to the Justice Minister saying, find a way to work with the provinces to legalize it and allow it to be distributed and all of that. So that's really ambitious, but I think the next year ahead is really going to be the most exciting, because you have Obama leaving office, so we'll see what happens with the government down there. But as he leaves, he'll be working with Trudeau. And on April 20th, of all dates, the United Nations General Assembly is meeting in New York, and they're talking about marijuana legalization around the world, how to end the war on drugs. So we've got Trudeau and government in Canada promising to start legalizing it as of January, figuring out a way. Come April 20th, New York, United Nations, discussing how do we let countries around the world legalize it now. And I think soon after that, Obama will allow the United States to say, well, Canada legalized it, I guess we can do it too. And they'll reschedule, probably to schedule 2 or 3 to allow medical use, but nobody's going to let it be totally free. And that's one of the questions that a lot of people have, is what kind of legalization will we have? It was so many years of saying legalize it, and people are like, okay, but how? And now we have to figure that out.
Yeah. Well, tell us about Washington and Colorado, because obviously, Washington close to British Columbia, so we keep a close eye on them. In the past 2 years, both of those states have moved towards a regulated and taxed system. Tell us about their experience and what lessons we can draw from them.
Well, there was it was very contentious, that whole election, 2012, because I was part of the Initiative 502 campaign in Washington State. And ironically enough, Mark's own prosecutor, John McKay, joined us to fight for legalization. So we worked alongside him to legalize it. But that legalization is not really a very good model, even though I campaigned for it because of the significance of the overall message. When it gets to the details, it's not that great. They decided to use the alcohol distribution system as a model because in a smart way, they did say it's a system that exists. These are people who are employed. They know how to deal with distribution. So let's let them handle it. So in terms of, not creating a second bureaucracy, that's smart. But they don't allow people to grow their own. And they created some more felonies that were misdemeanors before. And they also included a DUI, driving under the influence, blood limit of THC, which they admitted themselves wasn't even really accurate or scientific. But when they did their polling before the election to find out if voters would vote for legalization, one of the biggest concerns was driving under the influence. And when the voters said, I'll vote yes if you have a driving provision, the Initiative 502 group decided, okay, let's put that in because we want to win and we could deal with all the details later. But unfortunately, right now, a lot of activists are saying Washington is going backwards. They're being more restrictive. They didn't allow enough facilities for distribution. So, but the way I see it, people aren't getting arrested and they're saving a lot of money by not arresting people. And a lot of people's liberty is being protected because they're not going to be saddled with a criminal record. So that's positive. But Colorado is really a much better example because they allow people to grow up to 6 plants. And most people won't grow their own because it's a lot of work. I mean, do you really want to grow all your own vegetables or all your own pot, or do you want to grow your own tobacco plants or coffee beans? Not really. So the stores that are there are providing this product to a huge number of people. And I had some numbers I jotted down a while ago because Colorado had announced how much tax revenue they had generated in the previous year, and it was $152 million. And I took their population of 5.35 million. I took Canada's population of 35.16 million, did the math, and if Canada had been selling pot in retail stores, medical and recreational, and allowing people to grow 6 plants if they chose to do so, Canada, in the same time, could have generated $998,895,600, almost $1 billion in tax revenue could have been generated in Canada at the same time with the same system if it were going to work out that way. I think it would be a little bit more because Canadians smoke more pot than Colorado. There's a lot of conservative areas down there. But what you're seeing is a lot of money being generated and a lot of jobs being created. And for me, I like saying legalization equals job creation, because you don't even need to grow pot and sell it to have a job with marijuana. You can create labels for packaging. You can create the transportation systems, or look at anything out there. You can be involved in any sort of alcohol industry without touching booze at all. You can do branding or PR or lobbying. There are so many different jobs in every different industry. So marijuana can create a lot of opportunities and a lot of tax revenue. But hopefully that tax revenue will only be based on what normal commodities have, not a sin tax.
Yeah. Well, and this is the concern, right? If you hear from some people, oh, sure, tax it like cigarettes, which would, I think, just entrench the black market forever. Because if you're taxing, we tax cigarettes at 300%.
Oh my goodness.
And people don't really know this in Canada, but 1 of every 4 or 5 smokes, depending on which study you believe, is contraband. Whether it's brought in through First Nations from the United States, whether it's secret factories, whether it's brought illegally from Asia, 1 in 5 cigarettes is contraband. So, the last thing we want to do is, especially since part of the economic model is saving money on enforcement, we don't want to have this black market entrenched. So I think Colorado, you're right, has done a very good job at keeping the taxes low enough that you start to squeeze out the black market, but not so low that they don't generate any revenue and see any benefit. Is that what is the enforcement situation now in Colorado on the black market side?
There are still busts. I mean, because there are regulations and rules. If you're operating outside of those rules, you'll probably have trouble. But there aren't as many busts as you would see for street dealers or that sort of thing, because that job is kind of gone. Nobody's really buying from the underground direct. If there's any sort of black market shenanigans, I guess those would be going on a bigger scale, probably for export to surrounding states. So that sort of enforcement is still in play. But mostly taxpayers in Colorado are only seeing benefits. A lot of the legislation details dealt with designating money. So they made sure that money went to building schools. There are schools built with marijuana money. And there are a lot of different programs getting funding. And Colorado even has a neat little constitutional note that if they create more tax revenue than a certain amount, the money goes back to the taxpayers. So Colorado taxpayers all got a little check for some cash because they created too much tax revenue from marijuana sales. So that's kind of a positive thing. I do want to comment about cigarettes, because I'm looking at different products and how they're sold and what people are willing to pay and how much tax is on those products. Now, if you look at a pack of cigarettes and you take out all those smokes, you can say that's about an ounce of smokable product if you took an equivalent of marijuana. Well, right now, marijuana is anywhere from 150 to 200 a pound, or an ounce, you could say, depending on where you are. And a pack of cigarettes, the equivalent rolled up, is like $10. And, like you said, a huge part of that is tax. So when you look at the actual profit or the revenue of that product, it seems like it's not a whole lot, but we know that the cigarette industry creates a lot of money, billions and billions, probably trillions of dollars, and that's taxes on people's income. There's people who work in those jobs. So when you look at a pack of cigarettes, you think it may be really cheap in terms of compared to marijuana in the same amount, but it actually still creates trillions of dollars in the economy. So if we reduce the price of marijuana to be worth just pennies, and put it into smokes the same way cigarettes are, you could sell a pack of joints, an ounce of marijuana, for $10, and more than half of that is tax. Now, I don't want those prices, but what I'm comparing it to is the amount. And when you look at other products like coffee, like people are willing to pay $5 for a coffee. And I have a few marijuana people who say, I don't want to be paying a bunch of money for pot, $10, $20 a gram in the legal market. And I'm saying, look at you, you're sitting there with like a coffee that's $5 and you drop $20 a day per coffee. So you're already paying a lot of money for that commodity. So there's a lot of confusion, a lot of uncertainty about what we can charge for marijuana, how much tax can you put on it? And I really don't have many answers, unfortunately.
Yeah. Is it your sense that across the country, every province will come up with their own way of doing this, like liquor?
I think so, yes. Yeah, because the federal government, we don't want a federal government making all the rules and passing them down. But you can just, really what I believe the Liberals should do is just have the health minister remove cannabis from the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. And it's not a drug, it's not illegal, it's not regulated in any way, and it just becomes a plant, which is what it is. And then you can allow the provinces to decide, well, how do we want to produce and distribute that? And it's, you see rules changing all the time for products. You see the liquor laws continue to evolve and change, even though prohibition ended long ago. So we aren't really ever going to see a set form of legalization. We're not going to see one model, one size fits all. We're going to see different cities and areas decide what they want to allow and what they don't want to allow. And that's really how government should operate, is more of a local small government, not a massive, rule for everybody, because it's not the same everywhere.
Well, one thing that, if you were to read the Liberal platform, there's not a lot of detail on how this is going to play out policy-wise, but there's some details. So first of all, I think it's pretty clear from the platform that they're going to make some kind of a system where it is taxed and regulated. I think maybe that's the provinces, maybe that's the feds. I don't know, but something. The other thing is that stood out to me is that when it comes to people who would be, let's say, selling it or participating in, the marijuana market outside of what's sort of regulated and allowed, it seems as though they're going to strengthen punishment.
Yeah. I did not like seeing that written in there. That's for sure. I was quite surprised to see harsher punishments mentioned. Yeah. That's not cool. That disturbs me. But what I think the Liberals are concerned about is being seen as too loose and too freewheeling. I mean, Trudeau already has to deal with the fact he's a pot-smoking prime minister, and he doesn't want to be seen as someone.
Great hair, though.
Yeah, I know.
Great hair.
He's a smoking hot pot-smoking prime minister.
But,
he'd be great on the cover of the revival of Cannabis Culture magazine.
There you go. I hope I could swing an interview with him, right? But what the Liberals are worried about is being seen as too open and too free with marijuana. And unfortunately, they might have some insider interest in maintaining the sort of quasi-legal medical marijuana license provider system, because a lot of Liberal insiders are involved with different marijuana groups and even Tweed and different licensed providers that are growing massive amounts of marijuana. They have friends in the Liberal Party, and those people might be interested in just maintaining the limited production, the limited supply source to try and give all the marijuana to Canadians, but that's not going to be possible. And that's something that's a big concern for people, seeing the Liberals just rewarding their own friends and not really allowing a true free open market to exist, because like you said, there are not many details in the Liberal plan yet. They aren't saying how it's going to be. So it's really important for activists or just general Canadians at large to say we really deserve a free, fair, open market where anybody can get involved, as long as they follow the basic standards that any restaurant or producer of a product follows. We don't need any more excessive regulations. We don't need all of these punitive rules. I mean, my husband Mark wrote a good piece called Marijuana Legalization, the new prohibition of regulation, because they have all these rules they're putting into place. When you say that people who have been convicted of growing and distributing aren't allowed to be involved, well, that's eliminating all of the experts and all the people who know what they're doing and the people who built this industry. And when they say you can't have marijuana distribution stores near schools, like in Vancouver, they have a 300-meter limit, well, that's absurd, because clearly young people are seeing alcohol and fruity flavored booze everywhere they go. Every restaurant has slushy alcoholic drinks. So the worry of kids getting pot because it's being advertised or seen in their vicinity of school is absurd. Nobody's letting kids walk by a bar and serving them up drinks just because it's within 300 meters. So these rules are really punitive only because marijuana has been illegal for so long. And we're going to see a big push for excessive punitive taxation. There's going to be this idea that, marijuana is dangerous. So in order to make sure we can pay for all the harms it's going to cause, we need to tax it heavily. But marijuana is much safer than many other substances, and it's not fair to give any sort of sin tax or to try and overtax it. Really, we can create enough taxation just treating it normally like everything else. But I'm going to confess that one of the sins of the activists, or one of the problems that we're dealing with now that we got ourselves into, was that years ago, one of our arguments we decided to use was to remind government and the public that gangsters and organized crime were making billions of dollars on marijuana. And wouldn't it be nice if we had those billions instead? Well, we didn't add the little note saying, well, it's a prohibition inflated price, and so really the price should come down, and so it's not really billions, but don't tell anyone yet. But unfortunately, we've got to the point where the government says, holy smokes, we can just take all the gangsters' money? That sounds great. So it's a really strange situation where we're kind of like, well, it's not worth as much as it used to, and it shouldn't be worth as much because prohibition inflated prices only become possible because of the risk. And if there's no risk involved, the price should drop. And cannabis should be grown and sold just for pennies per pound. It's really just a plant.
Right. Well, I think that also a question of if you're going to be strengthening criminal punishment outside of the regulated system, it also probably erodes some of those cost savings of enforcement, right? I mean, that's one of the arguments that's most attractive to me when it comes to this debate is that we could save money on not arresting people, putting them in jail for this. But if you're still going to be arresting people and putting them in jail for it, just for sort of mildly different purposes outside of the regulated system, then you probably won't have the same kind of savings on enforcement costs. And that's, I think, what we're seeing from the Liberal plan.
Right. And what you're seeing is a lot of former law enforcement and healthcare professionals and, people who depend on government for money. And they were against marijuana for so long. And now that it's becoming legal, they're saying, oh, well, I'll be the expert on policy or the legality and this and that. But they basically just want to get another job. It's almost as though they're shifting all the cost of law enforcement for prohibition into bureaucracy for regulation. And that's not going to make any savings at all. And it's completely unnecessary. We need to continue to emphasize that marijuana does not need any sort of special police force to go after people growing plants. I mean, it's just a little weed, and police have a lot more important work to be doing. And I see things like the Vancouver police are asking for more and more money. I mean, 20% of Vancouver city budget goes to policing. That's insane. That's a huge amount of money. And they keep asking for more. And we really don't need all of that spending going there. What we need is savings and a redirection of the money that they're already taking. But we do not need a bureaucracy to go after people breaking the rules on pot. It's really unnecessary, and it's just a new form of prohibition.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, which province do you think will do this first? Since my suspicion is there's going to be a test province here. Who do you think would?
Ontario has actually done something very interesting. They just announced that medical marijuana users have the right to smoke and vaporize marijuana pretty much anywhere. They have an exemption from the smoking laws, which I've been appalled at Ontario and Toronto's anti-smoking like insanity. It doesn't make any sense. So now we have this incredible decision that medical marijuana users can use their substance in public and in theaters and basically anywhere. Of course, hopefully those patients will do it with discretion. They won't smoke it just because they can. I hope we won't see that. But what we're going to probably see is a move towards allowing facilities to exist like my Cannabis Culture Lounge, where you can bring marijuana to use it. That's the next area of interest. It's sure, if we legalize it and you grow it and sell it to people, that's one area to figure out. But what about the ability to use it? And what about places like bars and restaurants or cafes and coffee shops where people are allowed to go use a substance in that facility and everybody there is consenting to be in that environment? That's what I think Ontario is going to see a lot more of. Right now, Toronto is having an explosion of dispensaries opening up, and there will be more vapor lounges, is what they're typically called. But people can smoke in them too, and now you have Ontario saying, well, tons of dispensaries are coming. There's no excessive regulation on dispensaries yet, and a lot of people are using it. And I think Ontario is going to create some interesting rules. Whereas Vancouver, of course, is the model for legalization, but it's also very anti-smoking, and they don't want consumption visible or available anywhere. So we have a few battles to fight there on our little left coast.
Yes, as always. Anything else we should know about this issue, Jodie? Anything we should be thinking about at the CTF as far as a tax and regulatory scheme
or predictions for what Canada's policy will look like?
I have no idea. That's the problem, is I really don't know what the policy will look like. And I do have I'm hoping to have a meeting with Hetty Fry. We have to reschedule. She is my member of parliament and with the Liberal Party. And I asked for a meeting so I could sit and talk with them and see what kind of conversations are going on. I mean, I did give a lot of the sound bites for the last few years and during my campaign, but I haven't been meeting with the Liberals behind closed doors. It's more of a admiration from afar or something like that. But I don't know what they have in mind, and I think it's really important for Canadians, whether they care about pot or not, to ask the government to not overtax marijuana or cannabis, because if we really do want to get rid of the black market, if we really do want to reduce the spending on enforcement in courts and all the processing that goes with that, we need to have marijuana treated just like lettuce, just like tomatoes, just like a regular basic product, where you can't grow a huge amount and sell it commercially without the proper procedures that people go through, but you won't be punished for having it or selling it. It needs to be with and taxation as possible. But unfortunately, especially with the Liberals promising to spend a lot of money for the next few years to stimulate the economy, we're going to need a lot of money from somewhere. And I guess marijuana could be the cash cow for a while. But hopefully, after some time, we can work on reducing the taxes and regulations on everything, including marijuana.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's awesome. Well, thanks, Jodie. And, it must be bizarre because you've worked on this for so long.
It is bizarre.
And it feels like things are now happening fast, and yet they're not.
I have to tell you, I've had a bit of, the last year has been interesting because for a while, the media and the public just wanted sound bites or messaging. And, I'm great at that. I can give you a sound bite. I can explain why legalization is important. But now it's about the details, about how do you sell pot. And I've never sold pot or grown it. We don't have a dispensary, so I don't know anything about that. So I'm not really an expert. Nobody's coming to me to ask for policy wonk details or distribution or growing details. So I guess I'm just waiting for the next rally where I could go out with a sign in the streets again. It's been a while. So I don't know what's ahead. And I've kind of been feeling a bit lost, to be honest, and wondering, where do we go from here? There's a lot of people doing business and everything with marijuana, and activism is kind of not really available as a job anymore. But I guess we need to have people there still saying, don't overtax, don't overregulate, and please, government, just get off our back.
Yes. Well, look, we at the CTF would love to be out of a job because governments were spending our money so efficiently. So if nothing else, you inspire us to keep doing our work, because you never know, light at the end of the tunnel.
Right. Well, and you never know with government. They'll probably want to keep you in your jobs forever.
Yeah, it's there's something new every morning, that's for sure. But thanks, Jodie, for joining us all the way from Chile. And I'm sure we will touch base with you again as some of these details start to come up.
Absolutely, and I'd love to help Taxpayers Federation and others with getting rid of the MSP as a little side note. Yes. Oh my goodness, I'll be in touch with you about that, Jordan.
Yeah, well, I still owe you that lunch.
All right,
so
we'll meet up. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thanks, Jodie.
Thanks.
All right, and now it's time for the waste of the week, an example of how government is wasting your hard-earned tax dollars. All right, and this one comes from Victoria, British Columbia. The Johnson Street Bridge spans the harbor of BC's capital, Victoria. It's often called the Blue Bridge due to its blue color, but a new Johnson Street Bridge is now under construction, and locals, Paige, are going to end up calling this the Red Bridge because it is massively over budget and years late. It was approved in 2009 with a budget of $63 million. It was going to open September 30th, 2015. I have reports from Victoria just in. It's nowhere near to being open. It's still 2 years away from being finished. 2017 is their new target, and that's a loose target. And it's now $99 million, $36 million over the original budget.
Wow.
everything you can imagine has gone wrong. They ordered steel from China that was flawed. They had to get new steel. They didn't sign a deal that protected taxpayers. They signed a deal that protected the company, and they just keep shoveling millions and millions and millions more dollars into this project. If you want a textbook example of how a civic government can bungle a project, check out the Blue Bridge in Victoria, BC.
That's so crazy. So, I mean, are people there upset about this? Is there any kind of, taxpayers getting angry, getting together?
Well, the mayor who launched it was defeated in the last election, replaced by a former councillor who actually raised some of these concerns at the front end. But the problem now is you're so far into it, right? It's shoveling good money after bad. I mean, you just can't stop. The Blue Bridge is 80 years old. They could have refurbished it for a slightly smaller amount, but you know how a government is. Why refurbish when you can build something shiny and new? Mm-hmm. But it's a big issue. And, when you talk about a city government that wants to build, for example, an $800 million sewage treatment plant, mm-hmm. The fear of that kind of, or the fear of that kind of management being applied to other projects in Victoria, I think drives a lot of opponents. So
it's such a common story. I mean, you sometimes hear you often hear of government projects, that are just going way over time, way over budget. I mean, this is a story that I'm sure our listeners and people who follow the CTF are all too familiar with. Somehow in the private sector, they just don't seem to stand for that as much. They seem to have, these crazy things called deadlines and budgets that they have to keep within. It's as though, there's a little bit of a difference between the sectors there.
Yeah, the power of competition, I think, is what it is, right? If you are inefficient as a business, you could go out of business. Exactly. Whereas government is here yesterday, today, and forever.
And they have an unlimited bank account, which helps them out, right? Because it's not us, the taxpayers.
Exactly. Go to the cash machine, the local taxpayer. But that is our waste of the week. So that's it for this episode of Tax Talk from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Be sure to follow Paige on Twitter at Paige McP, or myself at Jordan Bateman. If you're watching this on Blab, be sure to subscribe to our feed, give us props, all those good things. And if you're listening to this on iTunes, please subscribe and give us a good rating there. You can check out our website, all of our work at taxpayer.com. I've got a new piece up there today about tax credits for doing good deeds, which sounds nice, except it's really just a cynical attempt by politicians to buy your vote. Mm-hmm. Good people like to vote. Good people get tax credits, therefore they can buy your vote with your money. But it's up there now. And Tax Talk is going to return next week, Friday, December 4th, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, where our special guest will be our CTF Federal Director, Aaron Woodrick. Prime Minister Trudeau's world tour rolls into Ottawa, where he's supposed to be working. The legislative session, his first as Prime Minister, launches next week. Aaron's going to come by. He's going to talk about the Prime Minister's priorities, what we're looking for as far as good governance. That's all next Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern at taxpayer.com/tax.
That's going to be awesome. There are so many things we need more details on from that government.
It'll be interesting to see what they think are the top priorities that need to get rolling on right away. Paige, have a good weekend.
Thank you, Jordan. You too, and thanks everybody else for joining us. It was fun.
Yeah. Have a great week, everybody. Thanks for being here.